Hey yo, this is Dash, and today I'm going to be doing a brisket. So, I trying to remember who it was exactly, but on a live stream, and pardon my drinking probably, but I don't remember exactly who it was, but they were having some difficulty. You know who you are. You know the conversation we were having. You were saying you were having some difficulty with cooking a brisket on your pellet cooker. So today I have this is a 10-pound brisket. I am going to cook it, show you my entire process on the Traeger, and we're going to get it done. Get ready. This is my brisket.
There are many like it, but this one is mine.
All right, so here's that 10-pound brisket that I showed you. Normally I wouldn't use this much foil, but because of the fact that I'm trying to show you guys exactly what I'm doing, I'm going to spread this out to make it easier for you to see what it is I'm doing. I'm going to be using this is a boning knife, and I always start, this is the flat side, and this is the underside of the brisket. This is what I would call the top of the brisket. This is your fat cap. So I always start with the underside of the brisket, and I cut out this big piece of fat here. Your mileage is going to vary as to what and or how big or how much you have to cut away from your brisket. But this is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to try to walk you through my process. So I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to lift this up. And then from experience, I know that I can stick my knife right down in here and just kind of hack at it. And the whole thing is, as I hack at it, I will find that this piece of fat, some of it is superficial, and I'm going to come back. Now, mind you, I'm going to come back towards my hand, but I'm pointing the knife down into the meat so that if I slip, I'll slip down into the meat and not up towards my hand. I'm going to cut this entire piece off, going again, trying to make sure that I get this whole vein of fat out. And once you do this enough, you'll be able to determine where that fat is. And if you cut a little bit of the muscle off, it's not the end of the world. Don't cry about it. I see people just cut this off squarely. I don't do that. I go in and actually cut the fat out. I'm going to poke my knife down in there, peel it back, and I can see exactly where the fat is and is not. So I'm going to come in and trim that fat out. The more fat you get out of this brisket before you start cooking it, the faster this brisket will cook. And some of this on the underside of the brisket, I'm not making competition barbecue, or this is not for competition. These bits of silver skin and fat, if you want to take them off, be my guest. It is not going to make very much of a difference. I said what I said.
Why you pulling me? I'm right.
So I'm going to pull it off today just because I'm, looking at it. But for the most part, if it's not egregious, I'm going to leave it be. This is not going to make or break your brisket if this is here or if it's gone. Pull those pieces off. This is going to come off right here. You can stick your knife up under there. But again, my thing is, I'm cooking my briskets to sell. So the more meat I have on my brisket, the more money I make. So I try not to trim only but what I have to. And the things that I consider have to are the fat. My folks up here in Baltimore don't want to pay for fat. These bits of fat that are here, I'm going to cut those off and out. There is some fat that runs in between. This is the point, this is the flat, and this is the point. There's this piece of fat that runs in here. You can go in here and separate these two muscles. If this point and flat, or this piece of fat, were bigger, Like if this was a much bigger brisket, this brisket weighed in at just about 10 pounds. So it's rather small. But if this were a bigger brisket, you could see the knuckle of fat will be down in this brisket. I'm gonna cut this fat off of this edge. Again, I'm cutting more fat away because it won't render, and it'll help, or it'll make my cook take that much longer. So we're cutting that off. Now I'm finished on the underside. This little piece of fat here, I'll leave it. And you'll never see me cutting and trimming a piece of brisket one way or the other. It's just not what I need to do. Again, I'm cooking for catering, not for competition. Now this brisket, this piece of fat here is rather uniform, but there's an extra piece of fat here. So I'm gonna come in across the top. Again, I'm keeping my knife pointed down towards the meat. And then I'm just running the knife down, letting the knife do the work. And I'm taking off the extra bit of fat to kind of even it out. Down to the end. And again, I'm looking at this and I can see that there's more fat on this very edge here. So I'm gonna come back in through here. And I'm just working the knife, letting the knife do the work, while keeping it pointed towards the meat and not towards my hand, so that in case there's a problem, a slip, it won't come towards my hand. That is basically it. I am going to leave this brisket alone. I am finished trimming my brisket. Once the brisket is seasoned, I'll get it ready to go out onto the Traeger, and I'm just gonna go ahead and put it on the Traeger. I'll be right back. I need to actually go start the Traeger. I'm going to start the Traeger and put it to, or once I get it started, I'll get it set to 225 degrees. All right, so I'm back. I just went and started the smoker. One thing I will say, or I wanna make sure I make mention before I start to do or to season my brisket, I always season the underside of the brisket first. So the top side, the fat cap side, I always keep my brisket's fat cap up in the smoker, but I also season the bottom of the brisket first, so that when I flip it over and do the top side, that top side ends up becoming more of a presentation side. So hopefully that helps. But like I said, I'm gonna go ahead and get this seasoned, and then I will get it out on the smoker. Oh, hey, didn't see you there. There's my brisket. Let's get to the cooker. So we're gonna get this thing opened up, and my foil, I'm just gonna get the foil over here, put the whole foil right here on the cooker, and I'm just gonna push this whole thing off. Slide it right off onto. Now normally I have just a single piece of foil, but because I was doing this today, I have two. So just gonna slide the foil out. Everybody and their mother is driving by and making noise right now. So slid that into the cooker. Now one thing I want to show you guys before I forget. So down in the back of the cooker, hopefully you can see there's just like a pint pan. These are hard metal pans that reside pretty much in the smoker. I fill them up halfway with water, usually warm water, so that it can provide some moisture. Here's the spray bottle that I'll use to spritz, and I'll start spritzing these briskets spritzing the brisket in about 2 hours. All right, so here's some, let's say, a little tidbit of information I've found because of the fact, in my opinion, that the Traeger is like a convection oven, and most pellets are like a convection oven because they're blowing so much air around and convection happens. The higher you have the temperature, the more your brisket could possibly be dried out. So because of that air and it cooking a little bit faster, it could be dried out a little bit more. I've found I prefer to have my briskets cook or smoke on a lower temperature. Usually if I were using one of my wood burning smokers or a charcoal smoker, I would be cooking my brisket at 250 or 275 degrees. But in this particular pellet cooker, I've found that I like the way the briskets turn out when I smoke them at 225 degrees. You do with that information as you will. All right, so I am back out at the cooker, and it has been 2.5 hours because my life be lifing. But let me show you guys what the brisket looks like. So, waiting for the, let's say, outside to get a little dried out, but we got a lot of good color on there so far. So here's a, good picture of those pans I was talking about. These are hard, I believe they're like pint pans, X number of ounces, but so there's the brisket. And at this point, I'm going to spritz it and let it go for another hour before I check it. I'm just gonna make sure that the entire brisket is wet, close it off, and at this point, I'm just gonna let this sit out here. Actually, I'll set a timer for an hour. 1 hour, and I'll come back out here and I'll check and I'll spritz it. It'll probably be dark by then, so next time you see this, it'll be darker. All right, I'll see you in a bit. All right, so it's been 3.5 hours since I put the brisket on the cooker, and we're gonna get a look at it. Yeah, we're getting some good color down there. All down on this edge down there too. Oh yeah. So now I'm gonna temp it. If I had to guess, I was gonna say 140. So there you go. And I will spritz it one more again. Get this closed back off. I'll probably, I don't know if I'll let it go for another hour. We'll see. I'm not in a rush. So I'll check it. I'll set my timer for another hour. And I will check it then. All right. I'll see y'all in a bit. All right. So it is just about 9 o'clock and we have been on for 5.5 hours. And I am getting ready to wrap this brisket up. So I have my glove there, but let's get a final look at this brisket. So here we are. And see that? Looking at about 148. Usually I don't mind wrapping my briskets at about 150 degrees. I know. But a lot of folks always say, oh, you need to wrap your briskets at 165 degrees. Why? I find I like to capture the jus of the brisket. And how I best capture the jus of the brisket is to wrap the brisket a little earlier than most. Also, when I say earlier as in internal temperature, because obviously we're looking at 5.5 hours on the cooker. And here is, there you go. Look at that. Maybe that'll be a thumbnail. All right, so let me show you what this brisket is hot as hell, so I'm not gonna play. This is my pan. I'm taking the brisket, I'm putting it directly into the pan. I didn't add anything to the pan. I'm gonna turn my smoker off. I'm not adding anything to the pan.
We don't do that here.
Again, you know, there'll be some folks that'll say, oh, you need to add some broth, or you need to add something. I don't add anything. This is all I add. All I add to the pan is the brisket itself. And I'm going to take and cover this brisket with foil tightly. Center this a little bit more and a little better. That is it. That is it. I don't add anything else to it. Try it. Try it this way and see if it works for you.
You can do it!
Now I'm gonna get this in the house and put it in the oven. I'm gonna put it in the oven at 300 degrees, and in about 2, maybe 2.5 hours, this brisket will be done. So I will monitor the temperature internally on this brisket, and I'll report back once it's finished. I'll see y'all in a bit. All right, so we are literally, it was 2 hours later after being in the oven at 300 degrees.
Nice.
The brisket. This was a smaller brisket than normal, but what I'm going to do at this point is let this brisket rest. You see, I don't say unfortunately, but this trail of the juices coming out of the brisket is where the probe was, but that's okay because this brisket looks pretty fantastic. There is plenty of jus down in the pan, and I'm going to collect the jus and provide it to, I won't say my customer, but to the person I'm doing this brisket for. All right, so now at this point, what I'm going to do is let the brisket rest for a few hours, and I'll bring you guys back when I am going to, well, when I cut this brisket up. What I'm going to do is cut the brisket up, and I'm debating if I'm going to vacuum seal it or just put it into a pan and send them on their way with this brisket. Either way, I will bring you guys back in a few hours. Welcome back. So typically when I do these briskets, I don't start them in the afternoon, and they don't finish in the middle of the night. I start them early in the morning, and then they finish mid-morning. So I don't have to wake up once, I like set an alarm was what I did, so that after 2 hours, I got up so that I could cut the brisket once it cooled. So I left it sitting on the counter for 2 hours. At this point, I'm gonna go ahead and get it cut up, and I'm gonna show you how I cut it up. I know I've done plenty of videos of me cutting a brisket like for serving for catered events or catering events, but you guys are gonna see me do it again. I'm gonna go ahead and get it done, so I'll talk you through it. So let's get this finished. All right, so first things first, I'm gonna put a wet paper towel underneath where my cutting board is going to go. This cutting board is, I won't say old, but I've had this cutting board for a while, and because of that, it doesn't sit flat anymore. First things first, I'm going to get my fat separator out, and I'm going to get a glove. Just gonna drain the brisket a little, get it on my cutting board. have the brisket out, I'm going to get make sure the stopper is in. And we're going to pour the jus into the fat separator. I have a link, an Amazon link to the fat separator down below. Make sure you click more. Check out those links down in the description for some of the tools and things I use often in my videos. I'm gonna put this behind me, and while I am slicing the brisket, the fat will separate from the jus, and then I will pour the jus into containers. All right, I just realized that I didn't show you guys the jus once it is settled, so let me show you guys this real fast. All right, so here is the jus that's settled. You can see down at the bottom, that is the jus. Up at the top, all of that is the fat. This fat separator, once I pour off, this is a little over a cup. Back with the cups, and just gonna stick this here on the counter. Okay, so I'm going to remove the stopper, and the seasonings and other things have kind of settled to the bottom of this. So what I'm gonna do is move the stopper in and out, which will agitate all of the seasonings and things that are in the bottom of the jus. Now we can get that open and off. And I'm gonna pour about 3/4 into each cup. And I'm just gonna keep an eye on my container, and I can see when the fat, so right now you can see, hopefully you can see, there we go, kind of up in the light. That last little corner is all of the jus that's left, and here we've gotten into the fat. So we're done, but that is what we have between the two cups, and I'm just gonna spread that there so it's even, and we have about 3/4 of a cup in 2 cups for my customer. All right, so hopefully that, I won't say answers your question, but that shows you my process. This is not the only way to do it. This is how I do it. So I'm just showing you how I get it done, so that you know, for my customers. Anyway, that's the jus. Back to the video. All right, so first things first, you will never ever see me cut a brisket here. There's too much of the point that is on this side, and there's too much of the flat that's on this side. I will always come in between, take my knife, stick it in between the two muscles, and you can feel the fat line of separation. And I'm just gonna push my knife directly through the entire, you know, point and flat. So you can see where the knife comes in, and I'm gonna go east and west to separate the point from the flat. And you can feel where the fat is and how to separate this. And you saw me just lift up on the, again, this is the point, this is the fat cap side. So I lifted up on the point so that I could maintain and only get right into the fat. So I'm coming across, same thing, cutting right through the fat, and we have the point separated from the flat. Now this flat, I'm going to turn it over. Here is the grain of this. So I'm going to turn it perpendicular, and I'm going to cut against the grain. And I'm trying to make like 1/8 to 1/4 inch slices. That one's a bit big, but you guys get the idea. Now when I'm slicing, I'm using, this is a 12-inch straight edge meat slicing knife, and I'm pushing the knife in and down, in and down, in and down, and once I get to almost to the end, I'm pulling through to make a clean cut. So here I'll pull this out so you can see, hopefully. I know the light sometimes does the smoke rings and things like that injustice because it washes them out. All right, so now that I have the flat cut, what I'm going to do is cut this into smaller pieces. So I'm going to turn my cutting board slightly and come perpendicular to the cuts that I already made, and we're just going to make these into bite-size-ish pieces. All right, and I'm going to pick these pieces up with my knife and put them into the pan. Say neatly, but as neatly as possible. Now I will go ahead and get the point over. Now when you saw me come across this little bit of area here is primarily just fat, so I'm going to square this up, and there's very little meat there. So if I were making brisket beans or something like this piece of fat and that little bit of meat will get cut up, trimmed up, and thrown into the brisket beans. So I'm just going to stick that off to the side because we're not going to do anything with that. Also, this is a piece of fat here that I'm going to come in and the same cut out. There's no meat there actually. That's just fat. Again, my customers don't appreciate if I give them a whole bunch of fat.
Not today.
Now I've done in the past where I take my knife and I kind of flip it backwards and use it as a way to gauge how wide I'm going to make these cuts. But really 1.5 inches, 2 inches is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to come in, cut through here, and one more through here. Move these out of the way, and I'm going to come back and slice everything. So you can see this is where when I started to cook and I was saying I cut some fat off the fat of the fat cap, and I can see that there's more fat on this very edge here. This, had I trimmed more, there would be less fat there, but that's not too bad. So I'm going to take my pan and turn my pan 180 degrees so that as I'm cutting my point, I can put the brisket into the pan from here and back. So I'm going to come through here and cut these slices in at about 1/4 inch. It's more like 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch. Healthy. We're not cutting the slices this thick, and I'm not cutting them paper thin, just even slice. Here again, you can see the fat that had I trimmed it a little more aggressively, I wouldn't have that there, but I'm going to leave this because there's a decent amount of meat underneath that. And when I get to the tip of the point, I just flip it up on its end, because at this point it gets a little wonky. So I flip it up on its end on the cut side and just come and make my same cuts and finish it out. Pick it up, put it into the pan. All right, so I'm a little more awake now, and I actually turned the lights on in my kitchen. Sorry, it was a little bit dark of me cutting, or with me cutting, but I will just go ahead and get the cutting board cleaned up, and that paper towel that I used to keep the cutting board still, I'm going to use that to wipe around the cutting board where, you know, some of the errant pieces of brisket got off the edge of the cutting board. But let me show you guys the finished brisket in the pan. All right, so here we are. This is the flat and this is the point. So you can see very, very uniform slices between the two. So if someone were to take some pieces of this and some pieces of that, they would pretty much have the same exact thing. But let me go ahead and do one extra thing that I haven't done in a while. I'm going to weigh this out so you can see how much brisket is, I'm going to say left, but how much brisket was, what the yield was after we sliced everything up, got all the jus out, and cooked the brisket, so we can see exactly how much brisket we'll get. All right, so I started with like I believe it was a 10 or a 10.5 pound brisket. So let's see what we have. All right, so 5 pounds, 11.7 ounces. So I won't say as of late, but I've been getting about a 55 or 60% yield. So this 10 and some change pound brisket, again, 60% yield. I got almost 6 pounds of brisket, and it was a 10 pound brisket, or a little over 10 pound brisket that I started with. So hopefully this answers your questions. Hopefully this helps you guys out. If you have any other questions about brisket specifically and cooking it on the pellet cooker, but this same method of how I cooked it pretty much applies to any type of cooker that you're going to be using. But I guess when the next one comes up, I will try to do a very similar cook in the Lone Star Grill's cabinet as I did today on the Traeger. So again, hopefully you guys found this helpful, and I guess I'm going to go to bed now. And you guys, I'm sorry, I'm like rambling, but thank you so very much as always for watching. If you haven't already, please do subscribe. I greatly appreciate it. Look, I'm going to bed now. Talk to y'all later.
More butter, baby.